Dalan Hargrave has been a career goldsmith and lapidary for 50 years. When he began focusing on fantasy-style gem cutting about 28 years ago, he deliberately tried to develop his own unique style. Since then, Dalan has introduced more than a handful of new styles in fantasy cutting to the gemstone community. As a testimony of their success, Dalan has received close to 100 awards for innovative cutting from various organizations, both domestic and international. His primary focus is on understanding the optics and manipulating reflections within gemstones and transforming them into works of art. Beautiful material. Please give a nice warm welcome to Dalan Hargrave.
Thank you for coming here. Today's talk is going to be focused on the Buddha blue sapphire that was created around 1300 to 1400. But before we get into the talk, I'd like to take just a quick poll of who's here. So by show of hands, how many of you actually cut stones? Okay, how many of you are certified gemologists or appraisers? How many of you stumbled in here thinking it was an AA meeting? Okay, it's an honor to have so many people here. What I hope will be the end result of this, this stone has been well studied by people with better degrees than I have. But what I hope is to contribute a little different perspective on this stone and the person, whether male or female, whoever it was that actually did the cutting of this stone. So it's a little different perspective, but I analyzed it. Had the privilege a couple of years ago with Craig Lynch to examine the stone over at the museum. And I'm looking at the stone for its artifact tool marks that are within the stone. Before we focus on the main menu, I would like to go through just a few slides to show you where I've been with some of the work that I do. First, let me show you where I think the optic effect of concave facets first originated. Now, this is not a period piece of glassware, but in Pompeii, around the 1st century, it became well known doing concave cuts in glass and in some quartz, and it became known as the Pompeii style of cutting. You can see this example of it obviously has some concave facets all around the outside of it. So from an optical perspective, people would have been able to see this and see how the optic dish distorts the view and everything. So this would have been a well-known optical technique that dates all the way back to the 1st century. I came to Tucson for my first trip in '98, and I met a lot of the people that I was reading about in Lapidary Journal, and I met a lot of ego, people that thought they invented the wheel. I'm not going to name names, but you know, everybody said, oh, this is my technique, and I pioneered this, and I pioneered that. And unless they are much older, they did not pioneer concave cutting. So it dates back to the 1st century. Next, we have around 1000 is what originally was known as reading stones, where they were mostly convex stones that they were shaping, but they were paying attention to the optics. They could hold that over something real tiny, and then they could actually view the item a lot closer. That led to the invention later on of optical spectacles. And it's credited probably after the stone was created. But the point of those 3 tiles is to prove that this whole concept of concave faceting and concave surfaces has existed for a lot longer than just the modern day fantasy cut gemstone movement that's kind of in a renaissance right now. I mean, people have been doing that. Some of my mentors and people that I miss are the Moonsteiners, who, in my opinion, were the godfathers of the modern day fantasy cut gemstone movement. But even him, in some of the visits that I had with him, he admitted that a lot of these things existed before, the optics did. Now, he may have added those into gemstones as more of an aesthetic component, and I give him full credit for that. People like Michael Diber introduced his little optic dishes as a purely aesthetic component of gemstone cutting. And the list goes on. I don't know who the first person to drill a hole in a gemstone was, but I think they were living in a cave. So a lot of times people get a little ego strong and you think, well, I invented this and I invented that. I think you set yourself up to be disproved when you do that. And so I studied everybody. And I studied as much as was available in '98. The internet was so young. Today you can find anything on the internet, but then you couldn't even research it on the internet. So I spent a lot of time. I wanted to know, where did this originate? Where did that originate? And I had a few run-ins with people. I sent a picture to one guy, and again, I won't mention names because he's a wonderful guy and he's gone now. And he said, well, good news and bad news. And he said, I pioneered this technique in the early 1990s. I'll give you permission to do it, but only in Texas and not for competition. So I happen to know of a man named Charles Coville. Those of you who have cut stones probably know the name. He's passed on now. In the 1970s, he actually had an extensive number of cuts that he was doing. And back in those days, it was slide rule accuracy. So he was an engineer, and he did what this guy claimed was his original concept and that he pioneered it. So I sent him a note back. I was nice about it, but I said, do you know about this guy named Charles Coville? And he says, well, I've never heard of him before. And I sent him some of the GemCAD renderings from the work that he did, and it predated him pioneering this technique by at least 25 years. So my perspective on a lot of this is, I did not invent the wheel. I'm not a certified gemologist or anything. The contribution that I would like to think I'm making is just from the craftsman's perspective of putting the tool to the stone, and I've paid a lot of attention to the optics involved. So in analyzing this stone, I'm looking at it from that perspective. Not some great geological study of the chemical composition of this stone, not its origin or anything else, but simply the optics in this stone. Somewhere in the Rainbow Collection acquired this piece some years back, and the minute I saw it in Shelley's booth one year, I instantly recognized that it had very deliberate concave cuts. And to me, that was, in all of the research that I've done, that was the very first example of somebody doing a very deliberate concave cut to enhance the brilliance of the stone. Now, that's all hypothetical. I don't know the man, and we don't really have any documentation for who cut the stone, but that's my perspective in looking at it, and that can be clearly documented just in analyzing the stone, which, by the way, I do have it here in my pocket, and I'll try to get it where the camera can focus in a little closer later. It's a wonderful pocket stone, but I will be giving it back to you at the end. I've enjoyed having it, I resisted the urge to throw it up and catch it in my mouth like a peanut. But I do have the stone here. We'll try to focus on that a little bit closer later. So let me just give you a little bit of what is documented as the modern concave faceting movement. This machine here is an OMF machine, which stands for optically magnified facet. This was created by Douglas Hoffman in the mid-1990s. This is probably the first production model machine very specifically designed to do concave facets. So that's that machine actually, as you see it there, I've modified it. I modify everything that I've got to suit my purposes. But that machine dates back to the mid-1990s. The next one is a lot of people have heard of this, the Fantasy machine produced by Ultratech. And you can see a lot of the assorted cutters that you can place on it. The little mandrel in the front, this cylindrical shape, that is specifically what you would use to do a concave facet. So that machine's hugely popular. So let me get into what is a concave facet and how does that play into the optics of the gemstone itself. A flat facet is nothing but a mirror. It reflects straight lines of light. A concave facet is called a diverging lens. What it's going to do is it's going to take the light from a single light source, but it's going to scatter it throughout the stone. So in a concave cut stone, when these first started coming into the market, you used to see a lot of these in long, skinny tourmalines, and it's a wonderful way to add a little bit of life to a tourmaline that normally just has kind of a basic flat facet. So the curved surface alone, just in the little drawing that you can see there, it disperses the light. And if you can imagine, each one of those curved surfaces is dispersing the light the same way. So it's basically flooding the whole stone with light. Whereas if you're not lined up to a flat facet, off angle, you may not see the reflection. You can see these reflections from any angle. If you look at the quill of the machine that's highly polished aluminum, you can always see that line bar of light reflecting off of a curved surface. You can see it in a koozie or anything that's polished metal. It doesn't matter where the light source is at, you'll see that single line of light reflecting off of it. That is the functioning optics of concave faceting. So this is going to show you an example. One day, I took just basic native cut stones. Those are the same stones. The only thing that I did was by hand, I did concave facets in opposing directions, just to see the effects of adding some brilliance to a gemstone. These are not expensive stones, but as you can see, that bottom one is so, on the left-hand side, is so dark, you don't really get a lot of brilliance out of that. And adding a few concave facets added some brilliance to the stone. When these first started coming, and this is some of my work that I did before, actually, that I think that it really became popular. This was just my experimenting after '98. You used to see these kind of cuts, and they would call them the Millennium Cut. Now that term has kind of expanded, and you can look on eBay and anybody that's selling things on Etsy, anything that has a concave facet, they're kind of categorizing under the category of Millennium Cut. Whether that's technically and gemologically approved or not is debatable, but you'll see that quite a bit. Somebody calls it a Millennium Cut. Somewhere on the stone it probably has concave facets, and you can see how it adds brilliance to it. So this is going to show you the comparison. The number A, that was just a native cut stone. Poorly cut, it has a poor window in the bottom. You see those all throughout Tucson. They produce those by the thousands, and there's just really not a lot of brilliance to that. B is corrected angles. Paying attention to the refractive index of the stone, adjusting those angles to add the maximum amount of brilliance to a flat faceted stone. Then C is concave cut. And I do have to say, each one of these has exactly the same symmetry, exactly the same, what they call the plan view, the same number of facets all around each tier. The only difference is I've changed from a flat facet to a concave faceted stone. So then one of the other things that in my experimentation and trying to push the envelope a little farther is the D here, and I call that, it's compound concave. It doesn't just have a cylindrical shaped facet, it curves in two different directions. And I built a little apparatus to add to my faceting machine that operates a lot like a Rose engine machine in terms of the motion that it makes to do that curved facet. So thinking back to the slide that had the diverging lens and how it disperses in a fan pattern this direction. Compound concave not only disperses light this direction, it disperses light this direction. So what you'll see in that stone is not the straight, long bars of light that you would see on a concave facet. You see elliptical dots of light that dance all throughout the stone. And you can make your own determination about which of these has added more brilliance to the stone. So that's the nth degree that I've taken my concave cutting and trying to understand the effects of the optics. These are some of the stones that I've cut. A piece of kunzite from Ocean View Mine. I think that was close to 300 carats. It's bicolor, it has a little bit of a green tip. That stone is compound concave cut on the back, just flat faceted on the top. But you can see, instead of little bars of light, you can see a little bit, if you look close enough, you can see little elliptical dots of light that dance throughout the stone. Then there's a piece of morganite. That one as well is a combination of concave cut and compound concave cut. And actually, I believe that image right there is one that Gary Roskin took of the stone. So I've boosted that and have to give him credits or I'll have to pay. And actually, the image on the lower right, I think, is another one that Gary produced, just to show the effects of compound concave. Now, that's not something that you readily see, and you don't see the tooling to do that. I've had to manufacture my own tooling to be able to do these cuts. So, and don't ask me for that, I could tell you, but then I would have to kill you. But you can see that it's the optical effect that I'm after. So that's one of my fortes. If I was to put any feather in my hat, it's understanding the optics of what's going on inside the gemstone and trying to play off of that, bend the light, and you're painting with light and moving it around the stone. Another benefit to this kind of cutting is you can go irregular shapes. This citrine and blue topaz, I think, is somewhere in the rainbow collection. Little yin yang, and then it's a sunstone on the left-hand side. Now you can see in that sunstone, you see the curved shapes, and you can see some of them, they don't look like long straight lines. In that stone, the concave cutting on the back side of that is long straight lines. There is not a curved concave cut on that stone. What you're basically looking at is there's a series of straight concave cuts on one side that are small, maybe 2 millimeters apart. On the opposite side is a larger facet that encompasses that whole distance. So the reflection that you're seeing is actually distorting the image of what's directly across from it. That's what gives you that little wavy look within the stone. So that's just one of my ways of manipulating the reflection. These are some blue topaz, or topaz from Colorado that I cut, and you can see how versatile doing the concave cutting can be. The little puzzle piece on the left-hand side, you can follow those irregular shapes, and you still get the same optics within the stone. And I'll point out here, no matter what kind of cutting you do, if you're a gemstone cutter, you always still have to pay attention to the critical angle of a stone. You can't just start, willy-nilly cutting and chopping at something. You do have to pay attention to those angles. You can play with the shape of what you've cut all you want, but as long as you pay attention to those angles, you flood the stone with brilliance. And I mean, who doesn't like the bling factor in gemstones? And that's really what I'm after, is trying to expand that imagery. The one on the right, is not concave cut. However, again, that millennium cut has kind of encompassed anything that's concave cut these days. The term probably has just evolved to that. Today, there's so many people that do the little V-groove cuts to the back of a stone. I see a lot of those people calling that concave cut. Technically, no, it's not the curved surface that a cylinder would make, but it's carved up internally into the stone. So I've kind of relented, if they want to call that concave cut, and that style, it's probably a broadly applied term that's accurate. I'll give that to people. This is what I call the wave concave. The little apparatus that I built to do this cuts a concave shape, but it follows a pathway a lot the same as what a rose engine machine is capable of producing. It's following a template that does that throughout the facets. On the blue topaz, that has five-fold symmetry. So on which means on the back side of that stone, there are 10 facets. On every other facet, I've done 2 concave lines. Those lines reflect on the opposite flat facet. That's what's giving you the squiggly look that looks like it's interacted with the opposite facets. So this is just another direction that I've gone with concave facets to understand the optical effect of doing the curved surfaces.
Dalan, can you go back for 1 second?
Yes.
The morganite, if anybody wants to see this up close, that morganite is on display at the Gem and Mineral Museum in the barrel case inside the treasury room, so you can actually see how that pattern is.
Yes. Shelley just said for the recording, the morganite is available over at the museum in what case now?
In the barrel case.
In the barrel case. So it is on public display. You can go and actually look at the stone in person and see the optical effects for yourself. It's the Alfie Norville. It's the Mineral Museum here in Tucson, Arizona. This is just a collection of some of the cutting that I do because people have kind of broadly affixed the name concave cutting. I mean, I look at this more as V-groove cutting. I started doing the circular V-groove cutting a number of years ago. Now a lot of cutters do that as well. And the problem in the beginning for me in '98 when I came here, there wasn't a lot of readily available across-the-counter tools to do a lot of this. So while I build my own cutters, I do my own centered cutters and everything, today, if somebody wants to get into this and you want to broaden the scope of what you do, if you're just a flat faceter, there are a number of places where you can call and just order whatever it is you want. So great advancements in the tool making industry. I determined early on, excuse me, that I was not going to get in the tool making business. So I've left that to the people that's their forte. I make my own tools for my own purposes, but that's the limit of it. So this is another gemstone that's somewhere in the Rainbow Collection. But just to show you an example of how I like to play with reflection, the bottom of the gemstone on the right-hand side, it only has a single starburst. I call this my starlight cut. It only has a single starburst. The rest of the pavilion facets are specifically angled to reflect that pattern and create more of a kaleidoscopic effect throughout the stone. So it's very simple. You can look at the stone from the side. It doesn't look that complex. But the minute you face the stone up, it floods the whole top of the stone like a dandelion effect. Then you can go as far off the deep end as you want. This piece, just a piece of clear quartz, but I wanted to, okay, let me just see how far I can push, my own envelope of design. So I go all over the place. Now I call this, out of respect, the American Brilliant Series. That dates back, again, I did not invent the wheel. I did not invent the optics. I apply it to gemstones where maybe before it wasn't as prolific. But this dates back to the American Brilliant cut glass period around the turn of the 18th to the 19th century. Back in those days, cut glass was prolific. It was everywhere. They did these same patterns in glass, in glassware. It's your grandmother's vase. I was actually cleaning the little town that I live in, had a property that flooded. The city bought it. They were going to transform it into a park. And I thought, well, I'm going to go poke around this property. I found a dump. Back in those days, people just threw things in a big hole in the ground and covered it over. I found a little broken piece of crystal vase. And I thought, you know, I've got lapidary wheels. I could go home and shape that into something any grandmother would love to have. And I got to thinking, if I'm going to do that, why not just do it in gemstones? So for me, that was the genesis of me going down this direction, doing the whole concave cutting and doing these more intricate patterns. You know, not the random shapes that the Moonsteiners started off with. I did mine more on indexing and shape and tried to pay a lot of attention to the aesthetics of the stone. So that was the genesis for me. I named them out of respect to the American Brilliant Glass period. I call these my American Brilliant series. So let's get to the main event. This is the Buddha Blue, beautiful color sapphire. And I've had the privilege of analyzing that up close under 20 power magnification. And like I told you before, the minute I saw it at Shelley's booth, I recognized these were methodically placed concave facets. So in my investigation, okay, who really invented the concave facet? You know, you can take that all the way back to the 1st century. The optics existed then. And people will argue that, well, they didn't do it in gemstones. Well, who cares? If the optical technique was known then, and known to the point that they developed telescopes, microscopes, reading glasses that correct myopia and all of that, then the optical technique would have been known to a lapidary as well. And it's my belief that this stone has another provenance that we can add to this. Shelley tells me that the stone originated somewhere between the, I don't know if it's 1400, 1500.
The paper that was done was created by Chris Smith at AGL Labs and Cheetah Lul, who is a very well-respected everything in our industry. She does a little bit of everything. But they actually did the research and the paper on this, and it dates it back to, they can get it somewhere between late 1300s, early 1400s for the cut.
Okay.
It is Sri Lankan.
Okay, so it's designated as Sri Lankan 1300s to 1400s time frame. So that gives you an idea of how long this has been in existence. And I believe this is a photograph that Robert Weldon took. I want to give him credits for that. The pictures that I took were with a cell phone sitting in El Jalisco Cafe in Bulverde, Texas. So they're the only ones I had to prepare on the PowerPoint. So this makes Robert's work look great compared to mine. So let me tell you what I did. I looked at this stone from a forensic analysis perspective. Okay, it's obviously, it started off like a lot of stones, even still do today. They'll get a piece of rough and then start shaping it to get rid of, you know, flaws, imperfections around the outside of it. What they usually end up with this just kind of, you know, oddly shapen nugget of a stone, but they've gotten rid of all the bad stuff. Now they can start focusing on what do we do to cut the stone. And on this stone, what you can see, just to give you an idea, you can see towards the top, you can see reflections that have those long straight bars of light. Those are a series of parallel concave cuts. They're evenly spaced, and throughout the stone, you can see on the upper right-hand side, you can see where there's one row, then right next to it, another row. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of what did the guy do to make those cuts? Because trying to do this bit with your hands and hold steady doesn't cut it. So he would have had to build some kind of little device to give him that incremental advancement, to give him the precise cuts. When I analyze the concave cuts, what I see is long, straight, parallel lines, little striated lines. The stone looks beautiful, it looks polished and everything, but under 20 power magnification, you do see those striated lines that are left over from the actual tool that made the cut and tried to polish it. You also see conical shaped lines. So the little tool had to have been able to go straight forward and backwards. It also had to be able to turn. To get a perfect concave surface, you need to create the cross-hatching in your polishing and cutting. Because if you only go one direction, you're going to end up with striated lines that follow that direction, instead of having that perfect conical shape that gives you the perfect reflection off of a concave facet. So whatever little device he had would have been built to accomplish that. It also has, just a little bit, maybe a third of the way down, it has spherical shaped. So don't want to knock anybody who thinks they invented and pioneered dimples or whatever, but 500, 600 years ago, there you are, there's dimples in that stone. And they accomplished the same thing. They disperse the light. Now, it is my opinion, at all the research that I've done, which I'm not a doctorate, I have a degree in OCD and ADD, but in all of the research to try to find, the earliest known example of the stone, it is my opinion, looking at this stone, that they've analyzed it before and they consider the concaves on the top of the stone. I think it's exactly the opposite. I really do believe that the undulating flat surface on the other side that they've always identified as the bottom of what would be a cab-shaped stone, I think that was the top of the stone. And to prove that point, Craig Lynch and I went into the stairwell of the museum where we had a little ray of sunlight, and you can clearly see the brilliance that those concave facets add to the stone. Another side benefit of concave facets is you can pull color and actually have, it's maybe an illusion. It's not so much that you've added color to the stone, but where you have a long straight bar of light, right next to it you'll have a long dark area that's basically extinction. So if you have those lined up next to each other, those long bars of no light are kind of having the effect of making the stone look darker. So concave facets can suck color. If you have a zone of color somewhere in the stone, concave facets can bring that color all the way across the stone and flood the stone with more color. You're not adding to it in any way. It's nothing more than the optical effect. So that is my opinion. So the cutting apparatus, and this is hypothetical. I'm just trying to guess, okay, what would this guy have had available to him? If it comes from Sri Lanka, I'm looking for tool marks. My notes say that it was a series throughout the stone in a lot of areas of perfectly parallel lines that you cannot get in there and do by hand. You have to have some kind of device that controls your movements. I look at it under 10 power magnification. You can see concentric lines in some of the dimples. That's an indication of the direction that the tool was moving. So the concave facets being evenly spaced apart, the spherical facets and everything, I've kind of conjectured what would the guy have used to make this piece of equipment. So two things. On the right-hand side, this is not my image. I boosted this from the internet. This is a primitive cutting tool that you will still see some people in India using today. But hand operated, he's got a bowstring in one hand. The little point that he's got on the other hand could be the spherical cut. Anybody at the period where this stone was created would have had access to this primitive device to get the motion down. You basically saw back and forth like a violin string, and it rotates the little cutter back and forth. They may have charged that with whatever compound was readily available to them, but doing the spherical cuts could have been done with that apparatus. I didn't bring that with me. But to do the complex motion of the concave facets itself, what I've arrived at, and you see in the middle picture, is a device. I tried to make it period authentic. They had teak wood available to them. It's a nice hardwood, so I made the piece out of teak wood. They did not have screws invented at that point. So a lot of the pieces in this are pinned, drilled and pinned together, as would have been the case. You can see kind of a little U-shaped part of this. I'll show you that in just a minute. That's just wedged to hold something in place. So I've tried as best I could to duplicate in a mock-up stone that's similar to the shape of the Buddha Blue. It's mounted in my little device here. And I'll show you in a bit how I go about operating that. So one of the ways that I do this with a cylindrical shape, they would have had copper readily available to them. Copper has a natural affinity to diamond compounds charged with grease and diamond bort. I don't know what they would have used specifically for cutting, other than it's a sapphire, so they would have had some access to diamond compounds. They've used diamond compounds to cut things, dating all the way back to the glass period. So, maybe he went down to the corner apothecary that, in those days had all kinds of chemicals and, powdered lapis to use for makeup. And, if somebody like that would have been readily available to the gemstone cutting industry, because they were cutting just flat faceted stones using the same compounds. So it's making the assumption that diamond compounds were available to them. I have some modern diamond compound that I'll be putting along with the exhibit. I've got two hard agate slabs. I put a little bit of grease on the slab, put a little bit of diamond compound on it, kind of mix it up, stir it around, and then I take the other slab with the charging tool, or the cutting tool in between, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on it. I'm embedding those little diamond particles into that little copper rod. So the the little device that I've made is hand operated. So that would have been period authentic. And it does not have to be some major complicated moving parts, even though Rose engine machines existed, as long as 500 years ago. Those are incredibly complex machines. This more than likely was just the home artisan, somebody that they knew could cut sapphires, but he would have been somebody that tried in his own way to push the envelope of what he was capable of doing. And having just basic resources available to him, he would have come up with some kind of little device that he hand fabricated out of whatever happened to have been available to him. So one of the things that you see here, the little wedge-shaped thing, he would have had the ability to do the parallel lines of being able to advance the stone forward. It's held in with just a regular dop. The dop can spin to a lot of different angles, but being able to advance it forward, the little cutter could reach all of the surfaces that are actually cut on this piece. And again, it's not a screw that bolts something down. This is more period authentic. They would have just wedged things in place. Like I said, it doesn't have to be complicated. So, in conclusion, what I'd like to do is actually demonstrate this. They've rigged up this camera, so hopefully you can get a little bit more of a bird's eye view of the actual process that I can show would have been capable, that whoever it was that actually did the cutting. Anybody got a burning question before we start this part of it? No? Okay.
Dalan?
Yes, sir.
So you figured they were using both cylindrical and spherical?
Yes. Yes. And that's obvious just by looking at the shape of the facets. So let me just demonstrate real quick. What I have here is a little device. If you can zoom in on this. So this is going to give me my back and forth motion. This little device here is what has the copper rod in it. So what they would have done was take a little bit of diamond compound. This is diamond bort. And They would not have had WD-40 available to them. But that's what I'm using because it works well with diamond compound. They would have just mixed that together, real simple, spread it throughout the stone. Then taken your little diamond or your little round rod, kind of mix that all around, get it all over the rod. And then to embed that into the stone itself, you can go over the top of it with another agate slab and just roll that back and forth, putting significant pressure on it. What that's going to do is it's going to embed as much of the diamond compound into the device as possible. So I am going to wipe that off just for now. But then what I'm doing is I'm going to place it in this little device that I've got. This is 600 grit, for anybody who wants to know. It's 600 grit, and again, I'll put a little bit of oil on it for lubricant. Who knows what kind of oil they use. It could have been animal fat, a lot of things readily available. So with just this simple motion, I've got the stone mounted here. I can come down. I can actually apply whatever pressure I want here, not a lot. But with this crank, if you can hear that, this is giving me the striated lines that go in a cylindrical pattern. If I want to saw this direction, which this stone does exhibit long striated lines that are parallel to the concave cuts, he would have had this ability as well. You can see the incremental lines here. If he needed to advance the stone, all he needed to do is take this out, carefully position the stone, slide this back into place. This holds this secure, and then do the next cut. And I believe the guy would have had enough dexterity that if he really wrapped his mind around trying to get the crosshatch lines to get a perfectly conical shape, there are artifacts of him attempting that, and tiny little pits that you see where the trailing end of it is kind of like a comet. That, to me, is an indication of the direction that he was moving in the specific cut. You would simply be able to go back and forth something like this. And believe it or not, within just a couple of minutes, one whole concave facet is cut. Now, what he would have done, and I don't have this as part of the presentation, he would have had one of these little copper rods designated for consecutive finer and finer grits. I could have supplied all of those, but the main goal was to show that this is a simple hand-built device. Other than the C-clamp, he would have been able to fasten that to a bench somewhere for stability and actually do the cutting to the stone. And again, I believe that that's probably well within the capabilities. I think he understood the optics of the concave cut because that was well known to come at the period of time when people were probably flabbergasted at the use of a microscope and a telescope, at how those curved surfaces distorted the image. But I am convinced that whoever it was that attempted to do the work on this stone, they very deliberately did those concave and spherical cuts to add brilliance to the stone. And I believe that is the bottom of the stone rather than the top of the stone. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate of whether I'm right or wrong, but when I look at the optics alone and how much more blue that stone shows up, I believe that undulating, more flat surface would have been the top and designated as the top of the stone. And we don't have any evidence of it being mounted in anything. Certainly no pictures of that. So again, this is hypothetical. It's my opinion, just based on a cutter's perspective and somebody that I feel like I do have my mind wrapped around the optics of a concave cut. So that's basically the end of the demonstration. If anybody's got a burning question.
Any questions for Dalan?
Yes, Meg?
Do you feel that they probably practiced on something softer that has since, disappeared into nothingness? I can't see doing it your first time on something like that.
Well, the question was, do I think that they practiced on something? And I think the answer to that would probably be yes. You know, if they would have built a little device like this, which I build all kinds of little rigs and jigs myself, I may not cut a whole stone to see, you know, did it work or did it not work. I'm basically just testing the function of the equipment itself. So yes, he probably practiced on it to see, you know, he's got this idea, this hunch, maybe this will work, maybe this will give me the parallel lines. I mean, the very minute that he realized that this is going to work, he would have been just like I am. He would have jumped in feet first and just gone for it. That's my opinion. And Meg and I probably share that opinion, both of us being lapidaries and, you know, maybe a little more advanced than some people. She's not intimidated by a nice piece of rough. Obviously, this was a nice piece of rough, and the guy wasn't intimidated to go about it with what would have been a relatively new technique, because we don't have any other examples that I've seen that may exist, but nothing that I've seen is proof positive that concave facets were deliberately used to enhance the brilliance of a stone. Any other questions? No?
Oh,
Yes,
there we
back
go.
here.
So why is there only one? After he goes through all this, does he not do more, or?
Well, somebody told him how to do this and then had to kill him. Yes,
Shall-
I don't know the answer to that. You know, it's my opinion that people did not just experiment with this. I think there's the one-off lapidary throughout history. The guys that were, you know, pushing the envelope of what was capable, the guys that were trying to figure out, okay, what medium can I use? You know, if I crush garnet, will that have an effect on this? There has always, in my opinion, been lapidaries who were of that curious mindset that they wanted to experiment. They wanted to see, how can I get this? You know, they can visualize it. And that's the first step, is to be able to visualize the concept. But then, you know, you didn't go down to the corner store, or you didn't call up Ultratech and order a sintered cutter. So they would have had a lot of experimentation going into trying to develop something that would accomplish what their vision was in their mind. So I think there's probably a lot of those people, but so few and far between that's why we don't see good examples of that. It's a treasure trove for me to be able to see a stone like this and carefully document. It's been documented by other people, the age that it was created. And I look at this and I think this is proof positive. Concave facets to enhance the brilliance of a stone did exist that far back. Yes?
Can you show a video close-up of the stone?
Pardon me?
Can you show a video close-up of the stone?
I don't know how close you guys can zoom in. If I hold it closer, it's maybe not focused as well.
It will be back on exhibit in the museum probably tomorrow morning.
Right.
For those of you who have not been to the museum, it's an easy
If
walk
I stand
from
here and hold this, can you?
It's an incredible museum. Everybody should go.
Thank you.
I love it.
Okay, so I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to take it out. Watch this. Okay, so I'm going to show you the concave side. Can you see? I'm just going to kind of joggle it around where you can see the light reflecting. Okay, so don't go anywhere. Now I'm going to flip it over to what I think would have been the top of the stone. And if you can look, you see those reflections off of those concave facets. Now, they're not all done at what I would consider ideal angles. But again, I do believe, it's my personal opinion, that the guy deliberately did that to add some brilliance to the stone. And it does have the effect of pulling some of the color, since the stone is a little bit zoned, it pulls some of the color throughout the stone. You see how wonderful the color is and how even it is on that side? Am I moving too much? I'll try to hold still.
Can you pull the stone back a tiny bit? So I think it'd be in focus if there's a little.
Oh, he's trying to work on focus here.
Yeah, you might have to go back just a tiny bit more. There we go. What's that?
But you can see through the stone the reflection and bright lights that you see reflecting. Those are off of the concave facets. And as you tilt it around, you know, as the piece would have been worn, you would see more of that at different angles. And I think it's deliberately making the zoning a little bit more even throughout the stone, because that is an effect that concave facets have on a stone.
Look at tooling marks on the liner on the face surface.
I did, and on that face surface, the artifacts that I see are more in line with what would be a regular buff, you know, maybe a mounted wheel. Because you see, and anybody who's familiar with cutting sapphires, you know that it creates something that we all refer to as orange peel when you're cutting it. At certain grits, there's microscopic little pieces of the stone that pull out. And if you go over the top of that in a single direction over and over and over again, your polishing medium, your polishing wheel is going to dip down in that little dip, and then it's going to leave the little trail. This stone has those artifacts all over it. So you can tell in like one curve, you can tell he was holding it in such a way that he was going repetitively, which sapphire's hard, so it would have taken some time to bring up to the polish that you see on the stone today. So those artifacts are there throughout even the smooth sections of the stone. And again, we looked at it under 20 power magnification, and they're readily available. We didn't have to hunt or anything. They're all throughout the stone, even though in your hand, the stone looks beautifully polished. You zoom in close enough, you see those as clear as day. So there's no question in my mind being able to see those. Any other questions? Yes?
You referred to the angles. Is that like, does that have to relate to like the RI or the critical angle?
Yeah, directly relative to the critical angle. If you have on the bottom of a stone, if you have a stone that's too deep, the light comes in, reflects off of this surface, and then it actually exits the stone on the opposite side. If you have a stone that's too shallow, a beam of light goes in, it deflects, and it goes out the bottom of the stone. So there is a sweet spot of angles where light goes in, bounces directly across, and comes back at the viewer. That is the suggested critical angle of a gemstone. If you go below that, it will window. If you go too far above that, you'll have extinction and the stone will just face up dark. So there's that sweet spot that people should operate by. A lot of these native cut stones, they'll have more of an arc to the bottom of it. But what they're doing is they're shaping the stone, get the biggest size that they can, and then even with a jam peg, they're putting flat surfaces all across that. So as you tilt the stone, you're picking up some of those that don't go straight across, but it's having the overall effect of adding brilliance. But there is that sweet spot that you have to pay attention to even in today's cutting. Doing concave or the V-groove cutting, you still have to pay attention to that if you want the brilliance of